Hey friends, it's me, your girl, Kristen Denise, also known as KD, and we are here with another Today in Black History. And this one's pretty dope. This is something I've learned, very recently, because I was just, like, what has happened today in Black History? And that's how easy this is. I want to point that out really quickly. Do searches. What happened today in Black History? Like, be a person who is saying, I'm not going to limit myself to what other people want me to know. I'm going to learn the things I want to learn. That's how I know a lot of the stuff I know. That's how I've learned a lot of the stuff I want to learn. This stuff is not necessarily taught in schools. You can't always find it in all the history books, but I get to have the knowledge because I am seeking after the knowledge from a biblical principle, right? What does the Bible say? Study to show yourself approved. I think the same is true for our personal knowledge about our history, about our culture, about our people. And so this one is a recent one. I literally searched what's something that happened today in Black history. Because again, I told y'all, I'm a Black History 365 kind of girl. Okay. And so there's something that has always happened in Black history. I don't care what the day is. Somebody was born. Somebody did something amazing. It's the remembrance of something. So there were two things that came up for today. One of them was Turnaround Tuesday, which I'm actually not going to talk about, but you can feel free to look it up. I think I shared this before when I talked about Bloody Sunday, that 2 days after Bloody Sunday, Dr. King organized a second march called Turnaround Tuesday. They had about 2,500 people show up, and they ended up stopping at the Edmund Pettus Bridge because they were met by police again, and he was really trying to avoid the violence. So they stopped, they reached out basically to the president. They've got them state troopers to protect them. And then you had the completed march, towards closer to the end of the month, like around March 20th or so, when it came to dealing with Bloody Sunday. But if you want to look up Turnaround Tuesday, that's something that happened today in Black history. But the thing I am going to talk about is a fight for freedom. Like, Black people ain't always been fighting for their freedom. But this story was really interesting. Many people saw the movie years ago, La Amistad. So this is a story about the passengers, the Black people on La Amistad, and how they won a legal battle in the United States after being illegally taken from Sierra Leone and them trying to force them to enslavement after the international slave trade had ended. So violating international law. So let's get into it. Let's see what happened. So on March 9th, 1841, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of the African captives aboard the Spanish slave ship La Amistad, declaring they were free individuals who had been illegally enslaved. This landmark case, United States versus the Amistad, was one of the most significant legal battles against slavery before the Civil War. It involved 53 African men and women and children who had been kidnapped from Sierra Leone and sold into slavery in the Caribbean. And during the voyage, they basically revolted against their captors. They seized control of the ship and they fought for their freedom. So let's get into it. This is really important because this case became a symbol of resistance against slavery and helped to fuel the abolitionist movement in the United States. And the cool thing, again, I want to point out, they won this battle in 1841 while slavery was still legal in the United States. You're talking about 25 years or so before the end of the Civil War, which officially ended enslavement in the U.S. So this was major at the time. Let's see. They were kidnapped, and so these 53 members of, I want to say it's the Mende ethnic group in Sierra Leone, were kidnapped and sold into slavery basically in 1839. They were illegally captured because the international slave trade ended, I think, in 1808, 1809. And they were forced onto a Portuguese slave ship initially called Tacora. They were transported actually to Havana, Cuba, where they were illegally sold to two Spanish plantation owners, Jose Ruiz and Pedro Montes. The Spanish slavers placed them on a schooner called La Amistad, so it's a smaller boat, and crazy enough, La Amistad means friendship in Spanish, to transport them to another part of Cuba. The international slave trade had been banned in 1808 at this point, and so their capture and their sale violated international law. They revolted at sea on July 1st, 1839, led by his African name is Singbe Pie, but he's known as Joseph Sinke. The Africans broke free of their chains. They took control of the ship and used machetes to kill the captain and the cook. They spared the lives of the actual enslavers, Ruiz and Montes, and they were trying to force them to sell them back to Africa. But instead of heading east and actually selling them back to Africa, the Spanish men tricked them selling north at night towards the U.S. coast. So almost 2 full months into their journey, they were intercepted by the U.S. Navy at the time off the coast of Long Island, New York. And they were arrested and charged with mutiny and murder. And the Spanish slavers demanded their property back. Now, you have illegally gone and stolen these people from their land. You have illegally purchased these people to put them into forced labor. And you want your property back. They want their freedom back. The freedom they're supposed to have, and you shouldn't have been able to take because it was illegal. How you going to break the law and then want the law to work for you? Back to the story. The case was absolutely considered a legal and a moral battle because there was a question, basically a debate. Were these Africans enslaved property or free people defending themselves? Where you stand makes a world of difference. So the trial started in 1839. The abolitionist movement in the United States rallied to defend the Africans. They took up the case, arguing that they were kidnapped and had a right to resist enslavement. Lewis Tappan, who was a white abolitionist, led the legal defense. Josiah Willard Gibbs, who was a Yale professor, helped the people find Mende translators. Like, that was major, so that the Africans could tell their own story in court. And for the first time, African people testified in a U.S. court about their enslavement. Super significant. So they received a lower court decision in 1840 and they were declared free. The court ruled that they were illegally enslaved and should be free. But the U.S. government, under President Martin Van Buren, appealed the court's decision, siding with Spain's demands to return them to Cuba. Nobody's paying attention to the fact y'all violated international law. You shouldn't have been able to take these people into slavery. Nobody's paying attention to that. But you want your property back. Cool. The case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. So on March 9th, 1841, former President John Quincy Adams, now a U.S. Congressman at this time, argued the case before the Supreme Court. Adams delivered a 9-hour speech condemning slavery and defending the Africans' natural right to freedom. He had a change of heart over time, clearly. The Supreme Court ruled 7-1 in favor of the Africans, declaring that they were free individuals who had been illegally enslaved and therefore had a right to defend themselves against enslavement. The court ordered their immediate release, and this is the first time in U.S. history that African captives have won their freedom through the American legal system. We love it. We love to see it. After the case, they fought to return home, and the abolitionists helped them to raise money to help them return to Sierra Leone. By November 1841, 35 survivors finally sailed back to Africa along with American missionaries. Now, that American missionaries part makes me a little uncomfortable, but, they got to go home. Amen. The impact that this case had is that it increased public awareness of the horrors of slavery. Because remember, at this time, 1841, slavery is still very much so legal and will be for about another almost 25 years in the United States. So this is a major deal to have the Supreme Court say no, that these should be free people while also upholding enslavement within our own land. Trifling. Neither here nor there. It strengthened the anti-slavery movement, proving that slavery was a crime against human rights. Frederick Douglass later used the Amistad story to inspire the fight against slavery. So though slavery would continue, the Amistad case proved that resistance was possible and justice was achievable. So what can we learn from that case today? One, black people been fighting for their freedom. We've tired, okay? Black people have been fighting for their freedom. So we have to recognize that there has been consistent black resistance against oppression in all its forms, from Amistad to the Civil Rights Movement to today's fights for justice. We always been fighting. We always been pushing back. We have always been like, hey, this is not okay. Now, people haven't always listened, but whether or not you listen don't mean I didn't fight. That's number one. Legal battles can change history. We've seen it in a couple of cases, right? So we need to support organizations that are fighting against racial injustice in courts. Think of like the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the ACLU, things of that nature. There is power in solidarity when fighting oppression. The Amistad Africans did not win their case alone. It took abolitionists, it took translators, it took lawyers to help fight their case. So it is important to build coalitions when fighting against injustice. Final thoughts. This was a historic victory for freedom. The Amistad Africans were able to fight back physically and win and take over the ship. They challenged slavery in court and absolutely made history at the time. The case inspired future generations to continue to fight for justice, and their legacy lives on in every struggle for freedom today. And this is a quote attributed to Mr. Cinque, which I love. "We may be free, but still we are not free. recognizing that while they had won their fight against enslavement, that there were still at that time hundreds of thousands, even millions of Africans enslaved in the United States. And while they were able to receive their freedom and to return home, an understanding of so many people who were left behind in oppression, and the fight's not over until we've all been made free. So, as always, do what you need to do to be more than okay, because you deserve to be more than okay. Absolutely do what you need to do to live a life you love, because you deserve to live a life you love. And in the fight for justice and freedom, remember, one of the biggest ways you can resist is by having joy, by having rest, and by having control over your future and your life. So, do it, okay? Ain't nothing to it but to do it. I love you. Make it a great one. Mwah.